Hi everybody, this is Mr. Nolan, and in the last video we started talking about juncos and maybe what makes them a good study subject for watching a population change. We noticed that there's two populations. There's a Mount Laguna population, there's a natural breeding range east of San Diego, and then we have the UCSD campus where juncos are starting to live year-round, and they breed like crazy. So what we're going to do in this video, with what I'm going to do with you, is try to talk you through kind of how do we use Google. Google's a great tool. Yeah, they're taking over the world. But how do we use Google in order to collect climate data and also ground level data for comparing these habitats? We have a whole wide world of different habitats that we can explore, and we can use online search engines like Google to do that because they've got so many wonderful tools that are right at our fingertips as long as you have an internet connection. So we're going to collect climate data, we're going to get some ground level data, we're going to compare those data in order to make reasonable assumptions about what are the major differences between these different habitats where we find our juncos. We need to use our student activity sheets in order to do this. So if you have been absent this week and you're not really sure how to follow along, it's really important that you go ahead and get a hold of these student activity sheets, either the physical hard copy, or you can go to the link that's on the screen, one of the links that's on the screen, and you can go ahead and open up that sheet digitally and print some of the sheets if you would like to. So that's on the screen right now. So let me kind of show you how to use Google to collect data. That's really our main goal, is to be able to compare these two different habitats. Let's go to Google, let's use it for what it's good for, finding information. So we've got Google here, and the great way to find climate data with Google is just to go ahead and type a place like UCSD, and then climate data. That's all I'm going to type. I'm going to press enter. When I do that, Google spits out this beautiful little table that includes the month data of our location, of UCSD. And this is wonderful data, but it's kind of hard to interpret just by looking at it. So we can either sit down and graph this physically, which is what I ask students to do in class, and I'm going to ask you to do now if you haven't, or we can actually use Google to spit out this information as a graph. We see this nice little word graph here, so if I click that, bada bing, bada boom, gives us this nice little graph. So this is our UCSD data right here. We can see, all right, there's our highs and there's our lows. It's even giving us precipitation data. I've already taken the liberty to open this up on another window for Mount Laguna. So here's Mount Laguna. I scroll down a little bit, and again we can see that we have our highs and our lows and we have our precipitation. So like I said, I really do want you to actually graph these. You have to use, you know, the axis. They have to be properly scaled, the axes, and you're going to really end up making a special kind of graph called a climate graph. So before we worry about actually graphing, I just want to show you some things that we can notice here between these two different locations. So if I jump back and forth between these tabs, here's UCSD, okay? We see that if we jump back and forth, here's UCSD, there's Laguna Mountain, UCSD, Laguna, UCSD, Laguna. If I jump back and forth, what we can see here very easily is that, for one thing, it looks like UCSD's average temperature is a little higher. We can see that the highs and lows are both a little bit higher. They're also more like steady. They don't change as extremely as the mountain temperatures do. So the mountains, we have a pretty extreme swing between our lows and our highs, our winter temperatures and our summer temperatures. But at UCSD, that's quite a bit more mild. So we can see that those swings in temperature are not as extreme as the mountains here. What we also notice, if we look down here, is that we find that it's quite a bit drier in the summertime at UCSD than it is in the mountains. In the mountains, they actually get plenty of precipitation for most of the months except for June. June looks pretty darn dry. But UCSD, it's bone dry for several months. And then it's, you know, wetter during the winter times. So this is great. We have precipitation data, we have our temperature data, and we can actually jump forth very easily between these two, especially if you have two different tabs, and you can, you know, kind of do a snapshot of each of them. But I want to show you about how you're going to actually have to create these graphs on your paper. This is the best way to create a climate graph, is one that's actually on one one place. So I'm going to show you what these look like. I'm going to open up a new tab here, and I want you to give this a shot at actually trying to go ahead and graph this. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type into my little search box climate graph. That's just what I'm going to type in, and I'm going to go ahead and kind of pick some good graphs that I think are good examples of what we're going to see in our graph that we create. Let's see. Let's take a look at this one. So I'm just grabbing a random climate graph. This one happens to be from Rome. Let me get myself out of the way here. Okay. So what we find in this map is that we have the highs, just like the highs that were shown in Google, and the lows, and we have precipitation, which is kind of superimposed on them. It's kind of like behind them. This is a special kind of graph that has two axes. So it has an axis on the left, and in this particular example, the left axis is referring to the precipitation. So the left axis is talking about these bars. So if I go look at Rome in the month of June, I can see that my rainfall in millimeters is maybe about 32 or so. And that's because this bar is only talking about this axis. If I'm looking at the temperature, though, the high temperature in, let's say June, is right here. And that looks like it is, because I'm talking about the other axis, then June's high is maybe 27 or so. So each axis is talking about a different piece of information. The one over here, the rainfall one, is on the left. The one over here, the one that's on the temperature, is on the right. The lines are talking about the axis on the right. The bars are talking about the axis on the left. So that's how you're actually going to have to create your graph. You have to put your precipitation data and your temperature data on the same graph. It means you have to put two different axes on the same graph. If that's a little confusing for you, you can feel free to Google how to create a climate graph, and you'll probably find some tutorials on how to do that. It looks like there's maybe some YouTube videos on how to do that. But this is a really good graph, and we're going to want to create one for each location, one for each habitat, one for UCSD and one for Laguna Mountain. So if you have not created those graphs yet, please pause the video, stop, create the graphs. It might take you a few minutes, and then we'll take a look at Google Street View, and we'll kind of see how can we use Google Street View in order to figure out how can we learn more about these habitats. All right, so wonderful. You've created your climate graphs, both of them. You created one for UCSD, you created one for Laguna Mountains, and we talked about some of those differences in those different habitats. So we're done with that. That's done. What we need to do now is get some ground level data by using Google Maps, what's called Street View. It's a wonderful tool. It's very fun. It's a little creepy in some ways because you can actually look at somebody's front yard with it if you want to. But we're going to go ahead and use this tool. So I'm going to show you how to use this tool. So all you have to do is, here's my Google home screen. I'm going to type in the location where I want to be. So I'm going to go ahead and type in UCSD. That's all I have to type. And I'm going to click on Maps. And this is going to take me to a map of the UCSD campus, right? This is how wonderful Google is. In order to use Street View, what I'm going to do, we want to be able to make some observations about what do we find in our Street View. So I'm going to give you a chance to explore this campus a little bit. By the way, this is actually a really great way to explore campuses that you're interested in visiting when you go to college. If you want to see what it looks like there, this is a great way to do it. I'm going to go, so I'm on UCSD on Google Maps. I'm going to find this little yellow man on the bottom right. If you're using your phone, I understand that Google is pretty mobile compatible. You can use this on your phone as well. Grab this little yellow man and hold him over the map, and you'll find this little green smudge, and with the yellow man hanging over it. I can drop that little yellow man on any blue line or in any little blue bubble, and that will actually take me to that location, and I can physically move, I can three-dimensionally move around. So I'm going to drop him on one of those lines, and here we go. This is wonderful. I can actually see the campus from that location. I can even click on these little arrows, or I can click up here, and I can move ahead, right? So you can actually really kind of go on a little tour of this campus just by clicking on these arrows. If you want to exit Street View, just click the X, and this will take you back up to sort of the bird's eye view. And I want you to look at more than one place. I want you to take that little blue man and I want you to put him in a few different places. Whoops. This way we can actually get a pretty good sense for what does it look like around here. So we can see that, all right, this area we've got some trees, a little park, and we still have buildings and we have roads and things like that. So that's what you can use Google Street View to do. So I want you to use Google Street View not only to explore the campus, but I also want you to go over here and explore the mountains. So if we do explore the mountains, I'm just going to grab my little yellow man and I'm going to find any blue lines that appear. So maybe a little highway here. And if I go ahead and click on my highway, my little man falls on the highway. And here's my Street View. Okay? So feel free to explore around, and I want you to use the table, and I'll show you what page that's on in the student activity sheet. I want you to use the table to summarize some information about the climate and also about Google Street View. That way you can start to really do a good job of comparing these two different locations. So you can feel free to explore, use Google Street View to look around the Laguna Mountains and also UCSD. Start making note of what do we see in these areas that is either similar or different between them. So go ahead and take an opportunity to do that. Let me show you where we want to go for our student activity sheets. So last time that I showed you our student activity sheets earlier in this video, we saw right here, lesson 10, what's different about living in the city versus the mountains from a bird's perspective. While you are sort of summarizing these differences between these two different locations, I want you to write those down in this table. So I have sort of a PowerPoint version that I'm going to bring up for you. Here it is. And I want you to consider some questions. Now that we've done some sleuthing, some climate data sleuthing, and you've also gone to Street View and you've looked at these two different locations, you've compared all these things, I want you to start making some observations in that table, which I've created this PowerPoint version here. And I also want you to go through the student activity sheets. I want you to answer these questions. What are some reasons why the juncos might reproduce differently between the mountain population and the UCSD population? We see they have a longer breeding season at the UCSD. We see that they're breeding like mad. Why could that be? What about it that you notice in the climate and Google Street View? What about those locations might cause differences in that reproduction? Also, I want you to honestly come up with some new questions that you can come up with about these two environments. We saw in the video that you watched from the previous screencast that there are significant differences between these environments. What are some new things that you might be thinking, well, maybe this is another difference besides climate and besides the Street View stuff? Maybe this is something, a question I have about these environments. How do the climate and ground level aspects of these environments compare, especially as far as the survival or reproduction of the juncos goes? That's sort of summarized in this table. How do these compare? How might the resources differ? What are the resource differences that we might find between these two locations? And then also start putting some thought to what else can we investigate? How can we actually investigate these birds? What can we do in order to try to sort of link the differences between the environments to the differences between the populations? What else can we start looking at here? So we'll start to explore some more of those extra things we can investigate in future videos. But for right now, I want you to make sure that your climate data graphs are good and your Google Street View observations have been made so that you can answer these questions on page 68 and let me see, what are they? Page 68, 69, and 70 in the document. Okay? So I hope that once you've done that, you can really do a good job at comparing the major differences between the UCSD habitat and the Laguna Mountain habitat, because that's going to be very important in later lessons.